guys feel it? Hold on a second. Where's my pen, bro? Okay, no worries. Pull out a new pen. Okay, so we're about to start this book. Alright, got a pen. No idea what happened to my black pen. Alright, so we're doing the preface and the acknowledgments, and we'll see how we're doing on time once we've done that. Okay, let's open up the YouTube. Pretty good. Pretty good. Let's get into it. Maybe a little bright, huh? Why does it look so bright on there? Alright, so I gotta see how that looks. And let's move up. Let's move the exposure up a little there. Alright, almost ready. Yeah, I think that looks better. Okay, let's get into it. Oh, I should explain. Oh, I meant to... I wanted to put some text on the screen. So... yeah, let's just do that really quickly. So we're going to put text on the screen as far as why we're doing this. So, meeting, let's see, interview with author on 28 Jan. Nah, let's put 28A on A28. Okay. Interview with author on A28. Okay. Select font. 36. Okay. Whoa, way too small. 64. Okay, great. Select the color. Escape, select color. Little pipette. That's cool. Select color, escape, select color, little pipette. Why does it make me do a gradient? I don't want to do a gradient, but that's fine. It is what it is. Put that, I don't know, there. Boom. Aye. Great. Now I gotta add it to the other stream, even though... oh no, I've got 13 people looking. They want me to get to it. I'm trying. Hold on. Let me just get this little title up here. Alright, whatever. That's good enough, bro. No, it isn't. You can't even read it. Eek. Okay, whatever. We're doing it. We're getting into it, bro. Alright, here we go. Are you excited? Me too. Okay, preface. This book is a reflection on selflessness. That is what it means to be a person. Oh, by the way, I've listened to the first 2 chapters of this book, and I am thrilled. It's going to be great, and also, if you swipe away, you are running from self-awareness. So this book is a reflection. Yeah, pretty good. Okay, this book is a reflection on selflessness. That is, on what it means, on what it is to be a person, but not to be a self. My initial focus will be metaphysical and exploration. Oh no, I gotta get set up for this whole book here. All right, let's see. My initial focus will be metaphysical, an exploration of what kinds of things we are and of what kinds of things we are not. But the real point of this exploration will emerge towards the end of the book when we turn to the ethical import of the non-existence of the self and what it means for our understanding of our place in the world. I will be arguing explicitly for a position. I gotta move this, and I gotta move this. Alright, hold on, let's see how that goes. I will be arguing explicitly for a position that many may think flies in the face of common sense. Viz. That we are not selves, nor do we have selves. I will not argue that we do not exist. That would be madness. But I will argue that we exist not as selves, but as persons. I hope that my argument, to the extent that it is convincing, also persuades you that too often what masquerades as common sense is in fact nonsense. It follows from this that any philosophical program that takes our common sense intuitions for granted and then takes as its task to defend them by elucidating them or by making them more precise may simply ramify confusion instead of generating clarity. So I've got 2 interviews at the end of the month. One with the author of a book called Self, who doesn't really endorse the idea that the self be an illusion. And then this guy who, IMHO, has nailed it. Okay? So, some may react to this discussion by thinking that I am drawing a purely verbal distinction that reflects no real philosophical difference, and so think that I am devoting too much ink to making a trivial lexical point. Bro, don't worry about them, bro. They're tripping, bro. That I am merely arguing for the substitution of one of a pair of synonyms for the other. Others might think that in arguing against the view that we are or have selves, I am arguing against a straw man, a position that nobody in fact believes. And the other author sort of thinks this, or well, made that claim at one point, saying that does anybody really? Because so we've already had a conversation, me and Dr. Schachtman, and when we were talking about the self-illusion, she said, but okay, XYZ is an illusion, but does anybody ever actually talk about the self as that? I don't know. I don't want to say one way or the other. I want to discuss it more with her in our conversation, and then, but also, as you know, I've done street interviews, and I want to figure out, what does she say that people aren't saying, and then are they saying that in my interviews? I hope to convince you that neither is the case, that these terms have very different meanings, and that many people, whether professional philosophers or not, take themselves to be selves and not persons in the relevant sense, and that they are wrong to do so. That is, the distinction to which I will draw your attention is a real one, and the position against which I am arguing is no straw man. The ideas that I will develop are inspired by my long engagement with 2 philosophers. I gotta make sure that when an ad pops up, I am there to skip it. The ideas that I will develop are inspired by my long engagement with 2 philosophers, one Indian and one Scottish, Candrakirti and David Hume. Candrakirti was a Buddhist scholar and a partisan of the Middle Way school of Mahayana Buddhist philosophy. He was distinctive in his defense both of the robust reality of the world we inhabit and of the view that despite, or more accurately because of, the fact that it is not real, our own existence and that of the objects and institutions that surround us is merely conventional, dependent upon the way we think and the way we talk. He argued that although we might take ourselves to be selves that exist independent of and prior to these conventions, this is an illusion. Instead, he argued these practices constitute us as persons. All of this might sound a bit incoherent and even mystical, but as we continue our investigation, its plausibility and I hope its correctness will emerge. Just over 1,000 years after Clandrachirt's death, David Hume in Scotland defended strikingly similar views. He, like Clandrachirti, argued that we must take the reality of the world around us for granted. He also argued that we are systematically confused if we take our own existence and that of the world around us to be prior to and independent of our conventions. Our ways of acting, talking, and thinking. I'm going to read that sentence again. He, like Clandrachirti, argued that we must take the reality of the world around us for granted. He also argued that we are systematically confused if we take our own existence and that of the world around us to be prior to and independent of our conventions, our ways of acting, talking, and thinking. Hume also argued that although we have a persistent illusion of being selves, we are instead constituted as persons in the context of our interactions with one another and of the practices that enable those interactions. Although many have thought of Hume's position as interesting only as a straw man to attack, I again hope that as we proceed, its plausibility and indeed its correctness will emerge. So, by the way, so as you know, I have it theory, sort of a framework, a model of the mind. Hume had something very similar, but I don't know how developed it was. I haven't really looked into it. Just came across it in a book one time called the bundle theory, that the mind is just a bundle of these sort of competing and collaborating motivations and instincts and so on. Okay. So the fact that although Clandrachirti was a Buddhist monk and Hume was a persistent critic of religion in a Christian country, they developed strikingly similar accounts of personhood, as well as strikingly similar critiques of the idea of the self. And that's probably no accident. So I must have misread that. The fact that they developed strikingly similar accounts is probably no accident. It is highly likely that each account originated in a shared skeptical tradition with roots both in the classical Greek Pyrrhonian tradition and in Indian Buddhism, traditions that were in contact with one another. But my aim is neither to compare Hume's and Clandrachirti's ideas and arguments, nor to present a systematic analysis of their views, nor is this an exposition of Buddhist positions on the self. I have undertaken these tasks elsewhere. Instead, my aim is to develop and to defend the idea of personhood on its own terms in the absence of any self, and to explore its ramifications. I will do so in dialogue with both classical and contemporary discussions of this issue. I will draw freely on Indian and Euro-American texts, arguments, and ideas. I think that this is the right way to do philosophy. We should find ideas and conversation partners in every one of the world's intellectual traditions, and we should resist even the implicit parochialism that is reflected in attention only to our own cultural context. But this is not meant to be a book on the history of philosophy, and still less a text in comparative philosophy. It is merely the exploration of an idea in conversation with a wide range of partners. I will therefore not spend much time doing textual work, except where necessary to make that conversation clear. I do hope, though, that this discussion demonstrates in part the value of entering into conversations with multiple traditions when we ask philosophical questions. I take the topic of what we are to be one of the first importance. I take the topic of what we are to be one of the first importance for at least two reasons. First, I think that a central part of the human project, as Socrates and Plato emphasized in classical Greece, and as the authors of the Upanishads emphasized in classical India, is to know ourselves. That is, we think philosophically in order to come to know what kinds of things we are and how we fit into the social and biological world around us. Second, we are hypersocial animals, animals who recognize and respect norms, including moral norms. Indeed, our moral commitments are at the very heart of who we take ourselves to be. We are unable to countenance immorality. Don't think I know what countenance means then. We are unable to countenance immorality, and we each feel a demand to conduct our lives in ways we recognize as ethical. Countenance. Admit as acceptable or possible. Fantastic. That countenance. Page XII. So we are unable to accept as acceptable, to admit as acceptable immorality, and we each feel a demand to conduct our lives in ways we recognize as ethical. We therefore require a self-fucking understanding that makes our moral life comprehensible. Okay? And I don't know how that's so confusing. I don't get it. I don't get why people are so resistant to learning about themselves. I know part of the reason is that you're convinced you already know yourself. But then, like psychology and philosophy are screaming at you that that's not the case. And I guess you're just that arrogant about your ignorance. So yeah, arrogance and ignorance are the reasons. Okay. I believe that the illusion that we ourselves undermines ethical cultivation and moral vision, and that coming to understand ourselves as persons facilitates a more salutary, mature moral engagement with those around us. I guess salutary just means healthy, right? Anyway, for this reason alone, it is important to shed the illusion of the self and to come to terms with our identities as persons. And I hadn't listened to the preface, so I'm just even more excited now. My goal in this short book is to defend what I take to be a correct position, or at least an interesting one. I cannot provide a complete survey of the issues relevant to this question, let alone definitive solutions to any philosophical questions. In particular, there are fascinating and important questions about how to extend these ideas in order to understand the role of such phenomena as race, gender, and sexuality in the construction of our identities. These will have to be addressed on another occasion. Nor will I venture a careful history of thought about the self and the person, either in Asian or in Western traditions. Others have done that well. There is vast literature to explore if anyone is interested in the self and in our identity. I will nod towards some of that literature in the course of this discussion, but I will try to keep the account as uncluttered as possible so as to make this an easy read. Professional philosophers know where to find more. I include references that will guide those not already immersed in this literature to some of the most important work of my interlocutors. And I hope that this short book stimulates some of my readers to go deeper into this question in conversation with the texts, both classical and contemporary, to which I refer. Actually, I did listen to the preface, I just remembered. Okay, I know you're probably like, oh, what? The acknowledgments? And then, you know what's funny, hilarious, is that I'm actually going to stop the stream once I've done the acknowledgments. And then tomorrow, we're going to do chapter 1, okay? Am I going to do shrooms tonight? I do feel like I have a good deal of things to reflect on, and it's been a while, so maybe. Acknowledgments. My thoughts regarding the self and the person reflect not only my study of Kantakirti and Hume, but also years of productive dialogue with many friends and colleagues in philosophy and Buddhist studies. Some of these colleagues share my views, but many, while sharing my preoccupation with these questions, disagree sharply with me. I am grateful to them for forcing me to confront difficulties with my position and to defend it with greater force and clarity. After all, every philosopher needs friends on both sides of any issue. I acknowledge in particular Dan Arnold, Anita Remedies, Don Baxter, Christian Cuseru, Angela Coventry, George Dreyfus, Douglas Duckworth, Janardin Ganeri, Sandy Huntington, Constance Kasor, Catherine Lindemann, Guy Newland, Sway Ku, Vasudevi Reddy, Mark Sideritz, Nico Silence, Jesus, Yash, Tabakash, Evan Thompson, thank you. Tom Tillemans and Dan Zahavi, who Schachtman also talks about. I want to thank Evan Thompson, or Relief, in particular for years of friendly but energetic debate about these questions. I've learned a great deal from Evan, and much of my thinking has crystallized in our interchanges. I also want to acknowledge that my first musings about human contrakirti on the self and the person were in the context of Constance Kasser's work on her excellent honors thesis on that topic. I learned a lot from her, and her insights informed this work. Thanks to El Aviv, Blaine Garson, Constance Kasser, Guy Newland, Sean Nichols, Graham Priest, Andy Rotman, Robert Sharf, Roy Sohar, Jan Westerhoff, and 2 anonymous readers for very helpful comments on earlier drafts. Thanks to the 5 College Buddhist Studies Faculty Seminar, a venue in which many of my ideas germinate, for a spirited discussion of this manuscript that led to important improvements. In particular, I note the valuable suggestions from Peter Gregory, Jamie Hubbard, Sonam Katru, Constance Kasor, Sarah McClintock, Kristen McCulloch, Tim McNeil, Kat Pruitt, Carl Schmid, and AJ Sinha. And I am very grateful to my dedicated team of research assistants, Christina Chu, Molly McPartlin, and Haley Jane Richson, for their insightful and sound critical commentary and for their careful editorial work. This book is much better for their contributions. Finally, I thank Rob Tempio of the Princeton University Press for the idea of writing this book in the first place, and for sage guidance and critique as the project has developed. And, Jody Better for improving this book in the editorial process. So excited to see you tomorrow for chapter 1. Thank you so much again.